Last week we had a look at some misconceptions as well as some tips to avoid making your felt too stiff. So if you haven't already, I recommend you start by watching that video first. And if you're feeling stuck in your felting journey and don't know which steps to take next, I've created a guide to help you with that. So you can find the link to that guide below this video. And today we're going to have a look at how we can apply the tips from last week in a practical way. So we'll be making a piece of flat felt. In other words, we'll be making a sample. So grab a piece of merino wool and let's do this. So I've chosen my wool. It's a 19 micron merino wool top, and I've also weighed it. It weighs 6 grams in total, and I've divided into 2 pieces, and each one of them will be for 1 layer. So I'll be doing 2 layers on a template that measures 30 by 30, and this is in centimeters. Alright, so let's start laying out our wool thinly. So each layer will have about 3 grams. And I always start as thinly as possible so that I can then distribute my wool for the whole surface. And what I do is, in the end, if I still have some wool left, then I come back and distribute the rest I still have. Also try to be as even as you possibly can from the beginning. That's important. And go on laying out until you cover the whole surface. And when I arrive at this point, I like to turn my template around so that I get the thicker side of my shingles to lay on the margin. So because I still have this little piece, I'm going to use it to fill in any bits that are thinner, which I do have on this side. Okay. So as you can see, it's pretty even, and I've got my first thin layer ready. Now I'll be laying out the second one, and for that I will be turning this around like this again, because I just like laying out in this direction. So I prefer laying it out horizontally than vertically. So I'll be laying out this in exactly the same way. So I'll turn off the camera and come back to you when I'm ready. So I've finished laying out my 2 layers. I've added my water and my soap, and now I'm going to use gentle methods to felt and fold the piece so that I don't get holes in my felt. So there are a couple of different ways you can do this. You could, for example, place a thin plastic film on the fiber and then massage through the plastic. Now, to be more efficient, you can use a tool, something like this, for example. or a round one that you would rub on the fiber like that. I have a little bit of water coming out, so I'll place my towel on this side. So you'd need to go in both directions, of course, like this and like this. So this is one possible method. Another one would be to gently hit your felt on the table surface. If you want to, you can use this moment to check if there are any holes in your fiber, because you would still have time to correct them. And you can, of course, alternate between the different methods. Don't make too much pressure while you're doing this. Be gentle. You can make more pressure later on. Another way to do this would be, instead of using the plastic film, to use some netting and to rub through the netting. So for that I need to have soapy hands. Be very, very gentle, and if you're using netting, you will need to remember to lift it now and again to make sure it's not attaching to the wool. So now what you're looking for is you want your wool to become stable enough to move on to the next fulling method. Okay, so I'm going to go on using these three methods I've showed you, and when I've got some shrinkage, I'll come back to you and show you the next step. So I felted quite a bit. This is about 24 centimeters, so that means that I have already a shrinkage of 20%. Still no holes, but there's still a lot to go. So it's a pre-felt and it's still very, very fragile. So what I want to do now is I want to roll. And this is actually where you could start using hot water, but I'm going to go on working with room temperature water. I'm going to add a little bit of soap because I've removed it. I've rinsed the piece a little bit, so I'm going to add some soap and some water. Don't need much. And I'm going to start rolling. For that I'm going to use a sushi mat. Now don't ask me how many rolls I need to do. I need to roll enough to get the shrinkage that I want. So I'm going to put this on a towel so that it doesn't slip. And I'll just be rolling as many times as I need to. I don't necessarily count the times I roll. The important thing here is that you roll on every side. So now I'm going to turn it like this. And next in this direction. As you can see, it already shrank relatively to this. So if you see any wrinkles on the piece, flatten them out. If you leave wrinkles on the piece now, you won't be able to get rid of them later. Okay, so now I'll roll it again in this direction and then the opposite. And what you can also do in between rolls, if you want to, is you can do some rubbing. Now, there isn't any rule for this. The only important thing if you're working with a fine felt is to use gentle felting and fulling methods. I'll be massaging in all directions again. Flip this and do it on this side. And remember to also massage diagonally so that you get everything to be nice and proportional. And I'll just go on repeating this. Roll and rub, or use any other technique you like, as long as it's a gentle technique. All right, my felt has shrunken quite a lot and I think it's ready. What do you think? Let's have a look together. So if I pinch my felt, nothing lifts anymore. And if you look really close, you can't distinguish the individual fibers anymore either, right? So I'd say this felt is ready. Now, could I go on shrinking it more? Probably. I'd say I could shrink it quite a bit. I haven't been working with hot water, but if I were to use hot water on this and go on rolling, I bet I could have it shrink quite a bit more. But the thing is that I'm aiming at a fine and flexible felt. So if I wanted to be flexible, I think I'd stop here and I wouldn't go on fulling, because if I go on fulling, it'll become harder. All right? So now let's have a look at the shrinkage. So this was my initial template, and this is how big my felt has become. And as I said, I could probably go on shrinking it. Now, if I measure it, I'm sure it'll be around 15 centimeters. Exactly, 15 centimeters. So it shrank 50% in both directions, right? Now, just to finish it off, I'm going to iron it and come back to you to show you what it looks like when it's ironed and dry, because this is wet, so it's pretty difficult to see how flexible it is. So I've ironed my felt and it's now finished, and this is what it looks like. Can you see how fine and flexible it is? And there are absolutely no holes in the fiber. Now let's have a look at this again. So we have, this was a 30 by 30 template, and I now have a piece that is 15 by 15. So I got a shrinkage of 50% on both directions. Now there's this idea that if you shrink as much as 50%, this could be considered overfelting and the result would be a stiff felt. But as you can see, this is anything but a stiff felt. So the conclusion is that if you do your layout thin enough, even if you have a very big shrinkage, your felt will still be pretty flexible and you won't have the problem with overfelting. Okay, so next week we're going to go on with this topic because there's still so much to talk about. If you don't want to miss it, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you then.